Hi, welcome to the November 4th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bigstick.
Present.
Commissioner Kraske.
Here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
Vice Chair Rubenstein.
Here.
Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Berman, would you lead us in a salute to flag?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On to administrative business. First off, the approval of the order of agenda. Commissioner Campbell.
I move we approve the order of agenda.
Commissioner Kraske.
I second that.
Okay, please vote. Okay, passes. Next up is the approval of the minutes, which we have none. And designation of liaison to the city council meeting, we have none. And on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. If there's nobody here to speak on that, we'll move on. We do not have any consent items today. And so next up is we have a new public hearing. This is TUP 2-19, file number 2019-029, temporary use permit to install a temporary structure to enclose the Ocean Shore Railroad car number 1409 and to perform restoration work on a portion of the Valimar Center Shopping Center at 2125 Coast Highway. Recommended CEQA action is a Class 4 categorical exemption. Recommended action is approve as conditioned. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. The staff received one public comment prior to this evening's meeting, which I've provided via email and printed copy to the Commissioners and placed additional copies for the public at the rear of the council chambers. The item before you is consideration of a temporary use permit to allow the placement of Ocean Shore Railroad car number 1409 on a portion of the Valimar Center Shopping Center at the intersection of Highway 1 and Reina Del Mar Avenue. The Pacifica Historical Society intends to undertake renovation of the rail car to preserve it as an important element of Pacifica's history and to ultimately open the rail car at another location as a museum with interactive exhibits and historical items. The placement would be for an initial term of 6 months, with Planning Director authorization to grant an additional 6 months if the applicant requires additional time to identify another location for installation and renovation of the car, or the applicant has encountered logistical difficulties in timely relocating the car upon the expiration of the initial term. Any extension would be preceded by public notice to surrounding residents and property owners. The placement of the rail car would involve minor grading to level the site. After grading, the applicant would install wooden cribbing onto which the rail car would be placed. Then an enclosure structure would be erected around the rail car and security fencing would be installed around the perimeter of the enclosure. The applicant would finally install motion sensor security lighting within the fenced perimeter to discourage vandalism of the rail car. And you can see here the proposed location. It's in the right center of the screen. It's that small rectangular area at the back of the shopping center. And this is the condition of the rail car when it was first transported to Pacifica. And you can see here the temporary enclosure that's currently enclosing the rail car at the Calera Creek water recycling plants. The renovation work on the rail car would be performed periodically when volunteers are available. All work would occur within the same authorized hours as construction within the city. Renovation work would involve operation of a generator to power interior lighting within the enclosure structure and small hand tools and power tools needed for the primarily carpentry work needed to restore the wood-framed rail car. Conditions of approval recommended by staff would require review and approval by the planning director of a power plan and an exterior lighting plan to ensure the size and noise rating of the generator, as well as the placement and orientation of exterior lighting, would be appropriate for the site. As conditioned, staff believes the temporary use is appropriate for the project site and would not be likely to have adverse impacts on surrounding business owners and residents. Therefore, staff recommends finding the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and adopting the attached resolution to approve temporary use permit TUP-2-19. Thank you.
Questions for staff?
Just curious, maybe it's a question for the applicant, but why couldn't the work just be done where the rail car is now at the current location on the quarry?
Sure. The city needs to take back that space to allow construction of a new building to support the wastewater treatment plant's operations. And so relocation of the car is required. There's no other identified city property alternative, and that's why the applicant sought private property locations.
And follow-up question, did the letter change your opinion at all on the adverse impacts to neighbors and property?
No, I think through review of the power plan and the lighting plan, as well as the temporary nature of this use, I think it doesn't change staff's assessment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Big Stick?
Yeah. So my question is, to your understanding, is the lighting in the evenings, the security lighting, going to be generator operated, or is that going to come from an off-site power source?
So it's my understanding the overnight security lighting on the exterior of the enclosure would be battery operated. And so I believe a solar power system would likely recharge the batteries during the day and then allow it to run, periodically as triggered by the motion sensor.
Cool. And then my other question is, I see that they have a lease for, it looks like 2 years on the site, but we're only doing a 6-month use permit. I understand that it can be up to a couple of times. So first of all, correct my understanding if it's wrong. It looks like with ease, that use permit can be up to a total of 1.5 years rather than a full 2 years. And then is there an understanding that they're definitely trying to find another space, or they're just going to have it in this space while it's being renovated, or?
So I believe the temporary use permit that we've proposed would allow an additional 6 months beyond 6 months, so a total of 1 year.
Okay.
Yes, the applicant has pursued a 2-year lease, but they did that without consultation with the city, and so I don't have the particulars about why they may have pursued that period. We do not have a mechanism to permit temporary uses for that duration, and this is not a use under current zoning, which could be permitted either by right or with a conditional use permit.
So ultimately, that gets back to the motivation of my question. If we wanted to do it for the full 2 years, we could not do it this way.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we have recognized that limitation in our zoning and have contemplated whether text amendment to support this type of use in the temporary capacity as well as the permanent capacity through some sort of permitting process is appropriate. And we're continuing to evaluate those options as staff. And if approved, either in the 6-month or the 12-month overall period for the permit, we would have time to undertake those changes to support this use if the council desires.
Okay, so worst case scenario, if this body were to decide that it would be preferred to somehow figure out the full 2 years, for the time being, it's on a piecemeal basis, and that's the way we must do it for the moment.
We have not evaluated whether we can get to 2 years through this mechanism tonight. My initial sense is that could be difficult. Temporary use permits in our zoning are not discussed for periods of longer than 1 year, and so that's where we felt comfortable with this arrangement. We would have to take another look, but I think pursuing a permanent solution through text amendment is the clearest path forward among the options that we've assessed so far.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Berman?
I noticed in the staff report, the work hours were 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but then in the conditions of approval, I think the city standard 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. was mentioned. Can that be revised to 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the conditions of approval for Monday through Friday?
So the applicant indicated those hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Those are consistent on weekdays with the construction hours. They're more restrictive than what the city would allow, but we were not inclined to suggest they work for more hours each day. However, on the weekends, those hours are not consistent with the city's construction standards.
Right. So then if the applicant thinks that they could complete the job from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for however long they need, can we revise the condition of approval for a start time at 8 a.m. and a completion time for 5 p.m.?
So there's no stated provision in the city's construction hour ordinance that allows for such an exception, so I would not recommend that you attempt to do that.
Okay. So basically, if the applicant decided to start up the generator at 7 a.m. and the nearby residents are possibly, maybe they don't go to work till 10 a.m., I just imagine there might be some complaints. So it's not,
Well, I think you could make the hours permitted under this temporary use permit more restrictive than the city's construction hours, which were adopted by ordinance, if there's a public health and safety concern, such as disturbance to nearby residents. What I thought your question was is, could we allow them to start earlier than 9 a.m. on the weekend?
Sorry. Purely for the weekdays, can we restrict their start time to no earlier than 8 a.m.? I mean, it may not be a concern for the nearby residences, but I'd imagine one of the possible concerns is the noise from the generator. And in the staff report, it mentions that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. would be sufficient on weekdays. But then in the conditions of approval, weekdays are mentioned from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which kind of expands it.
I mean, I think it's reasonable for at least two reasons. One is it conforms to the applicant's proposal, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and it also responds to potential noise impacts for adjacent residents. And so I think that would be a reasonable change to make after hearing any public testimony.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. And then also the parking spots and just construction staging. So it sounds like 5 workers, a maximum of 5 workers would be working on the car at a given time, possibly each driving their own vehicles. Given the businesses that are currently using that parking lot, I know the spots aren't necessarily designated with striping, but is there any concern with parking issues given the additional construction staging, construction parking? Are there any concerns?
So the 5 volunteers that you cited are for the ongoing renovation work. I think they estimated up to 11 or 12 on the day of the move. And so that could have a temporary impact on parking, but it's a short duration for that phase of the project. Beyond that, the 5 parking spaces in staff's assessment are not likely to trigger an overall impact at the site. And so beyond that, we view that as a landlord property management issue to sort out those particular parking space locations with the tenants on the site.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Kraske?
Yeah, just to confirm, have we ruled out all other possible alternative locations to do this repair work? Have we exhausted all kind of alternative locations?
The applicant can best speak to private property alternative locations which were identified. We did not receive information about those alternative locations which may have been evaluated. I know from speaking to other city staff, we exhausted locations on city property that the city would be willing to consider. And so there were no suitable locations identified on city property, which I believe led the applicant to pursue a private property location.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Campbell?
Just wondering about, in general, the ability of folks to work on and conduct this type of activity on private property in Pacifica. Is it something that, if someone else wanted to renovate another piece of heavy equipment or something like that at another shopping center, is it something peculiar to the zoning that they could, park a big piece of equipment and work on it next to residential neighborhoods? And how's the zoning work?
Sure. I mean, as I stated earlier, this use is not a permitted or conditionally permitted use in the underlying zoning, which is C1 neighborhood commercial. So that's the case for all C1 zoned locations in the city. That's why we were required to undergo this temporary use permit process to consider this use, which did not fall into the ordinary range of permitted and conditionally permitted uses. On that basis of it being a temporary duration, we have the authority to approve uses that are not stated as permitted or conditionally permitted. Otherwise, they wouldn't require a temporary use permit. And so this is out of the ordinary. Given the particular circumstances, we think it is appropriate to support this important community and civic restoration project. To do ordinary construction work on a piece of heavy equipment, we think is probably not a great community benefit. And so we think that the circumstances warrant consideration and approval of this temporary use permit, acknowledging that it is out of the ordinary and steps should be taken such as approval of the power plan and lighting plan to minimize any potential impacts on the surrounding area.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to invite the applicant to come up. You have 10 minutes to speak, but also if anybody out there wants to speak to this matter, if you haven't done so already, please complete a yellow card, and then we can call you up to speak. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Robert Woolenjohn. I'm one of many members of the Pacifica Historical Society, and I just wanted to give you an overview very quickly of our effort here. We're asking you to help us restore Railcar 1409. It was constructed in 1913, or bought by the Ocean Shore Railroad at that time. So we believe it has. Why support it? It's because it has great historic value. It's the only rail car that exists now from that railroad. And it provides an opportunity to tell more of a story of the development of the coast side and Pacifica specifically. Also, we perceive that there's going to be economic impacts and benefits from this project. This point of interest encourages people to linger and visit and spend time in Pacifica. It's just like another point of interest. And we want to increase tourism, and this is something that helps tell a story and give a reason to stay here. And so our goal as an organization is intermediate and long-term. Intermediate, we need to restore the car, and we're committed to doing so. We want to save this important relic. And also our long-term goal, as you may already be aware of, though, is that we want to relocate it to a permanent location near the Little Brown Church. We want to expand available museum space and create civic pride. So we have some desired permanent location benefit desires. We want to leverage visitor access to the Little Brown Church and the rail car. That's what we're eventually looking for, so you see where we're going with this project. We want to add to the Palmetto West Sharp Park Historic District, make this part of that district. We want to enhance the visitor experience, and we want it to be visible and accessible to the public. And so we're engaged now in restoration. As you know, of course, the car's not ready, and we need to keep it covered while it's being restored. So we are committed to this completion of this project. We have existing funds, and we're raising new monies. And the point of this slide is just to tell you that we have ongoing efforts to raise money to complete this project. And so I'll stop here and let others speak in regards to and answer any specific questions you have.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Greetings. My name is Scott Linder, and I am the past construction manager for 1409. I've been asked to speak tonight of the preservation of Ocean Shore passenger car number 1409. In doing so, I'd like to acknowledge the dedication performed by a small group of volunteers who have lended their time during the past 15 years. During the restoration, many of our fellows have passed on, leaving us to carry their torch. We are pleading to you and the community to assist in our endeavors to save 1409 here in Pacifica. So briefly, I want to thank you on that. Christian, I want to thank you for compiling a good, comprehensive overlook of our project. It's very well, and thank you.
Is there anybody else on the applicant side that wants to speak? Okay, so I'll close it, and then anybody from the public would like to speak on this? Okay, so, go ahead. You still have a few minutes, so.
With the history of the Ocean Shore, have any or all of you visited Valleymar Station to see their museum, their private museum of pictures and chronology of the Ocean Shore Railroad? If not, I invite you to go there one time and visit the original Ocean Shore Station. That's one of the original stations here in town. It hasn't changed much, changed into a restaurant, but they've made a wonderful job of a presentation of the Ocean Shore Railroad through their pictology and scenery inside there. So, thank you.
Great, thanks. I'll bring it back to the commission for
I had a
discussion.
question for the applicant.
Oh,
if I
if
could.
you have some questions, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Oh, I just got a question, if I could, if
You want to come back up, we'll
someone
ask
wants
a
to come
question.
up. Yeah, I'll have to speak into the mic just so for the record and everything. Just a question for the permanent location that you're seeking to locate the rail car. Just got the question be, why not conduct the repairs on the permanent location?
We have none.
You don't have the
We don't
permanent
have a
location yet?
location for the car at this moment
Okay.
secured.
I got it.
With the Pacifica Historical Society, they aspire to have it close to the Little Brown Church as a local community museum center.
Okay, and it sounds like,
Yes, I have a question.
oh, okay. Great, thank you.
I didn't see whose light went on first.
You could.
Commissioner Berman, yeah, go for it.
Another question. I think we have a couple questions for you guys. Unless you want to get your workout in, up and down. How long do you anticipate the construction will take to complete?
To be honest, 15 years ago, when we introduced the car into Pacifica, we asked a friend of ours at Ardenwood, on the other side of Dumbarton Bridge, they restore cars over there. And he did a presentation at the library, and professionally, they spent $300,000 in 9 years completing one restoration car. We're into it for 15 years and approximately $75,000 to $85,000. The restoration that has occurred, if you can see the pictures of the original car, there wasn't much to it. It's been almost completely rebuilt, saving some artifacts on the car and some members of the car. So to answer your question, it's an indefinite. Depending on our labor, we've hired a contractor to actually work on the car, so be volunteers in coordination with the contractor. So he's been under contract and ready to start as soon as the car is in Valleymore. I'd say right now, the rough construction is at about 75% complete, 25% to finish that, to make it weather tight on the outside, would probably take about 2 years of full time.
Okay.
That's not addressing the interior of the car.
Got it. So given that the temporary, I guess we could call it lease of the space, is probably going to be a year and a half before possibly coming back to Planning Commission, what are you doing during that time to try to find the permanent location? So I understand you want to locate it by the Little Brown Church. Is it just there's no open space to put it there?
I'm going to defer this question to the Pacific Historical Society directly. So, is anybody can answer that for us?
Well, we have not determined exactly where the car will be placed. Originally, we wanted to put it in the lot that's across the street, and that doesn't seem to be something that we can work out. There's different proposals to put it behind the church or on one of the sides of the church. So anyways, we're working on that plan and trying to make a decision that makes sense, so.
With the support of the city.
With the support of the city, of course, yes. Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell?
You've got a question next, but just since I've got the lot across the street, is that a city-owned lot, or?
Yes, it is, and I understand that there's plans to build a parking lot there or something. I mean, a parking structure is what I was told. So anyways, we're exploring all these various things. We had kind of hoped that we could put it temporarily at the old sewer plant, but that was nixed because that's being prepared for hopefully selling to a hotel. So that was out. That would have been a good spot to be temporarily, but anyways, we decided to go with the Pereira family. Originally, when we brought the car down, Pete Pereira wanted us to put the car there, interestingly enough, and we didn't do it. We ended up at Shamrock Ranch, where we were for several years, and then the city graciously let us move to the new sewer plant when we were being vandalized over at Shamrock. Okay. Anything else?
Could I just follow up with a question to staff? Just since I'm on the train,
I'm in no
I hate to
rush.
keep cutting you off. Is that lot across the street, is that the one across next to Pacifica Thai? Do I have my location right?
Yes.
And we already had that, we have that as a parking lot now, right? We talked about signage and everything.
Right, as a city public lot.
But it can't be located there?
So separate from the planning department's review of this specific application, there has been some ongoing negotiation that we haven't been involved in. And so that site, I think, was proposed and ultimately was decided that it, at least at this time, was not a good fit for it to go. I'm not saying that it would permanently, that's the decision forever, but at this time.
Right. It just seems, Senior Planner Murdoch recognized it as a, something of really significant value to the city, and recognized it, the city's recognized it apparently as something of significant value. So it seems like maybe there would be a way to, it's located there, it's right next to the Little Brown Church, and it seems like the volunteers would be right there, and you could probably locate it farther away. I'm worried about the lighting more than anything. I live in Valamar, and I know that neighborhood, and if it's going to be there indefinitely, I'm a little concerned. So I'm just wondering about that. If that's been explored, I'd like to hear more about that.
If it's been, the parking lot's been explored?
I'd like to know
or-
why maybe it can't be there.
So I probably can't answer that tonight, because I wasn't involved in those negotiations, but I know it was considered, and so it's not, something that we're obviously moving forward with at this time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Yeah, Commissioner Berman actually asked my question, so I'm good.
Okay, great. So if no more questions, we'll bring it back for deliberation and we can discuss it. Anybody want to start the conversation? Mr. Campbell?
Well, I think it's a wonderful project. I mean, I really commend the Historical Society for tackling this. I've been to Valamar Station many, many times, and really see the value of it. I guess I'm a little concerned about its location next to the homes at the front of Valamar for, it looks perhaps for an indefinite period of time, which is a different period of time than I was kind of understanding from the staff report. Maybe longer than 2 years, perhaps. Sounds like.
Well, to be clear, this authorization would not exceed 1 year from approval, if approved. Any longer term granted would be subject to a separate process. The commission would have another opportunity to consider that. And so the action tonight is not to grant an indefinite authorization for this to be located here.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I guess I've been around where we've granted extensions of time for example, construction permits that go on for, I've been 8 years, 10 years. So, I mean, I think these things can roll along once you grant them. So I don't know, it'd be my suggestion that before we make a decision tonight, I'd like to hear more about that parking lot next to the Thai restaurant, because that's city-owned, and if the city really does consider this to be something of significant value to the city, I'd at least like to hear why we can't use that parking lot.
Yeah, and I know it didn't sound like we had any public comments that wanted to come up. If so, I think you have to submit a card. But just from talking about that, I saw some head nods that, locating it at a nearby parking lot to the Little Brown Church would be beneficial. It just seems more efficient for everyone to put it somewhere where it could happily live a little longer.
I mean, I like this project. I mean, this is the kind of project, being in Pacifica,
Yeah.
like, I want to hear the historic rail car, and people obviously who really care about it are trying to restore it and contribute back to our community. I don't really have a problem with it being located at this property, frankly, and especially as it's only approved for 1 year. And I don't imagine this is a heavy-duty construction site where they're going to be working on it 24/7. It sounds like in 15 years, they didn't really have much work on it. So it's all volunteer-driven. So, I think it's kind of a neat thing to have in your neighborhood for some period of time.
Is it-
Historic rail car that they're renovating.
Yeah.
I'd put it in my yard.
Yeah, I agree. It actually reminds me of the one that, I don't know if it's still there in San Bruno, by San Bruno Park. I grew up climbing that. I don't know if anyone else did. But has the location, so in the Valimar parking lot area, has a different orientation been looked at maybe? Maybe one that's like perpendicular to Highway 1 and not right in front of these homes?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is the size of the rail car and the enclosure structure. So we estimate that the area proposed roughly is 30 feet deep by 90 feet wide. And the rail car is approximately 48 feet long. And so it wouldn't work in that alternative orientation. Not to mention the enclosure adds another approximately 12 feet to that. So we, I think, have some flexibility potentially in our permitting to shift it and try to find the location that's least impactful. It's a little bit difficult to do that from the dais, but if that's the direction of the commission, you should give us some direction to try to find the least impactful placement within that area.
Sure.
Commissioner Big Stick?
Yeah, within the context of placement itself, what occurred to me as I was looking at the site is maybe it could just be scooted a few feet south. It looked like maybe where those, there were 2 Moonraker trucks parked there at the time I was looking at it, but I don't know if it's a part of the same property. It looked like if you just move it a few feet south, I don't know if that would require coming back or not, though.
There is some flexibility from a spatial standpoint. I think the applicant can share more insights on the property owner's ability to authorize that. There are other lessees, such as the Moonraker food trucks, that have operational needs. And so I think, again, the applicant can elaborate on that, but it's not quite so easy for us to just say right now where it will go, but we can certainly work on that if this is approved with the commission's guidance in mind.
And I don't know how complex this needs to be overall. While I sympathize with the points that the email writer made, ultimately, this strikes me as being a very, very temporary setup. What you're telling us is that if we wanted to extend this past year, we couldn't. That as it is, the applicant has to jump through at least one small hoop to get the 6-month extension to begin with to make that a full year. After that, they have a 2-year lease, which presumably there would be a whole lot more work involved if they wanted to extend it past there. Meanwhile, a building needs to be set up where it currently is, which is why we're moving it to begin with. So the city has presumably a fairly pressing need for that space. And we have a place where it can temporarily be located. If this were presented as, yes, we found a spot for it, it's going to be in front of this house for the rest of its life. And I'm sure that the applicant would be elated if they had a permanent anything or even a thought that there was some view of permanence even on the horizon, but I don't get the sense that there's anything about this that gives the impression that anyone thinks it's permanent. I can't imagine it's a happy experience having to schlep a rail car from location to location every, if we're lucky, 2 years in this instance. So I'd be inclined to vote in favor of this tonight with the full understanding that every way I'm looking at it at least seems to lend itself to the notion that, yes, it's temporary. And as far as noise goes, it sounds like in the evening time when it actually would cause an issue, it's going to be battery generated. And so again, I appreciate with the generators on during the power outages, as I often walk to work, and as I was walking, I was, oh, there's a power generator, by my ear. So I know what those sound like. It's not the greatest sound in the world, but if it's happening during working hours, which again, it's set up to happen during working hours, within the context that this is all as temporary as I can imagine anything being written as, and again, I'm sure not to the delight of the applicant, I'd be happy to make the motion to put this through and then vote for it personally.
Okay, Commissioner Kraske?
Yeah, I also think this is a really cool project, the renovation of this car. I am a little reluctant to vote to have this car renovated at this particular site due to the light and noise pollution. So I think personally, I'd like to see a bit more research into alternative locations to renovate this car. That's just my take.
Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, I'm not saying that this isn't the spot to renovate it, but it just seems to me that I would like to know more about that parking lot unavailability next to the Thai restaurant before we make the decision. And I don't want to be too cavalier about the impact on the folks who live right next to it, because I do think that, yeah, this may be temporary in the sense it's 1 or 2 years, but those people who rent, it's not, if you're on a year-to-year lease, it's not really that temporary to you. It's a big impact. My worry too is the lighting, because if this car was vandalized at Shamrock, the front of Alomar, if you live in the neighborhood, there's a lot of activity at the front of Alomar, and I think there would be a worry about vandalism there as well. So I think you'd really have to light this thing up at night to prevent that. And if you really light that thing up at night, I just, again, worry about the homes along the back there and the impact, because I don't think it's going to be just a couple lights is going to be sufficient.
So I think the proximity to the home is actually a deterrent for some of this, because people will naturally call in if they hear people loitering or, some activity outside. So, that's my view on that. It's not a very isolated spot.
It kind of is if you walk around there at night. It's more isolated than you think it is. It's not like homes with like a backyard and it's not like it backs right up against the apartment buildings right along the side there.
Oh, I see.
But it is kind of dark back there. I don't know. It just, if you walk around at night, it's more isolated than you think.
So is it certainly going to be lit up throughout the night?
Well, the intention, as I understand it from the applicant, is to have a motion sensor system, and it's my intent, with the way we wrote the conditions, to have planning director review of that to try to confine those motion sensors to detect motion within the security fence rather than a broader area, so that we minimize false alarms, if you will, that illuminate the neighborhood any more than's necessary. Additionally, the intention is to direct the lighting away from the residents to make sure it's not, a large, tall floodlight type of fixture, but rather it's directed only towards the area where it needs to be. So we think that the impacts will be minimal and hopefully only triggered by motion that is of concern and not broader activity.
And I personally have a motion light in our side and backyard, and all the possums and raccoons, they set it off throughout the night. Luckily, our light is near our kitchen, so it doesn't wake us up, but I don't know, it doesn't make me feel much better about possible light pollution. I'm not too concerned with the noise, given the battery-powered lights during the night, and if we do approve this tonight, adding in the condition that work hours during the day are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I'm not too concerned with the noise.
Yeah, Commissioner Big Stick.
I was going to ask the was going to ask the question about lighting that Commissioner Berman just asked.
We're on the same page tonight, huh?
Yes, we are.
I mean, I'd be willing to make a motion to approve unless we feel like we need to postpone this hearing, this item for further information, but regarding these other locations. But you know, I'm actually committed to supporting these types of efforts. I'm sure it was difficult enough just to locate this site for them.
I certainly support the project. I love the project. It's great. I guess a hypothetical question, if we were to ask for other locations to be considered or looked at and kind of revisit this, what happens in the meantime? So like a month or two, are they still allowed to work on the project where it is,
So the city has a need for this rail car to be relocated,
like right now?
not like right now. So the city has a bit of time, but not much time. And so, you know, any number of unforeseen delays could occur with relocation of the car. We could have severe weather that further pushes it back. So getting an approval in place as soon as possible is in the city's best interest as the current host of this rail car, if you will. The city does need to go through a permitting process with the Coastal Commission to permit the building. That area is not in the city's permit jurisdiction, and so we're probably in the order of, you know, perhaps a few months before that permit could be granted. But to give some certainty to the applicant and to the city that it will be leaving, the current site is very important.
Okay.
And through the chair, I just also wanted to clarify that, you know, the city council, as our real property agent, if you want to, if you will, has said that the Thai parking lot is not available. And so if you do request that there be more research done in alternative locations, that may not be on the list, you know, that comes back to you. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
It sounds like a parking lot would be very suitable for this, but I don't want to burden the applicant, especially if there doesn't appear to be a large amount of public comment right now. Here's a creative thought in lieu of Commissioner Nieblin not being here. What if we were to approve the location and reduce the amount of renewal of the lease, basically?
To less than a year?
So less than a year or just only 6 months? Granted that, I know, we would be moving the thing
I don't even think
quickly.
it started in 6 months, like,
That's true.
right? I mean, it's a volunteer effort, and it's, I'm sure there's an expense just to move it.
Yeah, true,
You know, it's not a for-profit enterprise.
right.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, again, I don't want to confound my questions tonight on location with the notion that we don't support the project, or I think the project is worthwhile. It's, I mean, it's a volunteer effort. It's a nonprofit. There's all sorts of good things about it. I just was just wondering if, have we really, and has the city really fully explored these other sites, considering that this, it looks apparently like the city's recognizing the value of this. And I understand city council had, or there's some notion, I'm not quite clear on it, that the Thai restaurant parking lot's unavailable, but I don't know why. I haven't heard a reason. I just have this notion that it's not, but I wonder if that's been fully explored, or was it just like, I don't even know exactly. And also the lighting. Again, I get that there's a lighting plan being thought of, but I would like to just know a little bit more about the lighting plan. Just make sure there's not going to be floodlights triggered all night. And again, not a huge, there's not a bunch of people here with pitchforks saying, don't do it. But that is, I don't really always 100% rely on that as an indicator of public opposition. I think a lot of people sometimes just don't pay attention to these meetings. We do have some people who did bother to come up and say this is going to impact them, and I don't want to just...
Just the owner, not the tenants.
Well, the tenants themselves, I think, are kind of...
They're not represented here.
They may not know about it.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I also feel like in a year, years are gonna go by quickly. So if we do discover these are issues, we'll have an opportunity to reevaluate that in a year. Whether it be, you know, vandalism, light pollution, noise, you know, complaints from neighbors.
Right, well, I guess my understanding is we don't want to have these guys move again, right? I think
Yeah.
you recognize that as
Yeah,
well.
it's-
So
I'm
in a
sure
year
it's-
from now, if we do have these issues, we're going to have them move,
Right.
which is not what any of us up here
Highly
want.
inefficient.
So why don't we measure twice and cut once on this one, and let's figure out, and this may be the spot, but I'd like to know more just before we jump.
Yeah, that said, there isn't a critical, like, timing for this. There's some time, right? But it's not like they have a project they gotta start because they want to start renting it out, or, you know, typical construction type project. So if we table this for a month or two to get that information, it's not gonna have a detrimental effect, I don't think, right?
Well, a month or two, I would not recommend
Well,
that.
whatever the
I
time
think,
period
you
is
know,
needed.
to the next
hopefully-
meeting,
next
to have
meeting.
the applicant gather more information and describe the alternative sites that were considered. Certainly, the city doesn't have a burden to consider the alternative sites in this case. It's the applicant's application, but we can have them perform whatever alternatives analysis and provide that documentation for the commission. I would suggest continuing to the next meeting, at the latest, the meeting after that, because we do need some certainty for the city to move forward as the current host of this, as
Yeah.
well as for the Historical Society.
But is that realistic for a volunteer-driven organization to try and source new locations and talk to whatever property owners and determine if, you know, if it has impacts and whatnot?
Well, I think the applicant should speak to the capability of the organization to achieve that. I think they've gone through an extensive process, as I understand, over the last several years,
Okay.
looking for alternatives, and as a last resort, as I understand it, pursued this location.
And I don't know if there's anybody with the Historical Society tonight that's able to go over the various sites that they considered. I know there were, in addition to city property, there were several other privately owned properties that they considered.
I mean, I'm happy to re-engage and open it up if you guys want to do that.
Yeah, we could re-engage. Looks like we have a member of the public we'd have to open up for public comment again, but it looks like it might be short.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to open this back up to the applicant. If you want to bring somebody up who can speak only to that topic, alternative sites, and we can talk about that for 5 minutes.
Alternate sites. Our first choice is the lot next to, by the Thai restaurant. And the city manager, we had extensive talks about that. Even to use it temporarily, we were told no, that is earmarked for a parking structure, and that we could not use it. And so then we asked if we could use the old sewer plant on Palmetto to put it in there. And we were told no, because, in fact, it looked very good that we were going to be able to put it there, maybe before Fog Fest even. And then we were told no, that is being prepared for sale to a hotel, and we would be disrupting the plans for that. So then there was a proposal that we put the train right next on the lot, right next to the church, and that would block the light inside the building, plus it would block the view of the church. And that was not satisfactory to us at all. So then we realized, we were told that there was not any city property that would be available to us. So then we looked for land to rent. And the Pereira family, we thought it would be nice to have it on Highway 1, where the lot that a lot of signage is put up. We thought that would be a great spot. And the Pereira family wants to sell that, and they don't want to have us, we would encumber it. If we were there for 2 years, it would hurt their ability to sell it. So then they said, well, we could go onto this lot next to Guerrero's, where the two trucks from Moonraker Park. And we talked to Shirley Gibbs, talked to the people that own the property, the Pereira family, today to see if we could switch places with the Moonraker trucks. And they said no, that the Moonraker trucks would get blocked by probably people parking for Guerrero's. They felt, no, that she really didn't want us to have that part of the lot, that they wanted us to be where we have signed the lease for 2 years. And as far as other places, we really wanted to go into the old sewer plant. When that fell through, we were glad to get to Guerrero's. We don't have to move the train that far. It's still going to cost $4,000 because we have to jack it up, and it has to be put on a long bed, and it has to be moved. It's still expensive, but if it's much cheaper than moving it further. So anyways, it's kind of a summary.
Can I ask a question? Are there any of those sites that are they're not practical sites for you at this point to actually move to? Are there any other options besides this one that we're looking at tonight?
I don't know of any,
Okay.
except like we thought it would be great to be in that tie lot, even if that were not, even if they do put a parking structure there eventually, we thought it would be a nice place to work on it because it would get a lot of attention and we would get public input. But even on a temporary basis, that isn't going to be allowed.
Okay.
There was some discussion within the membership about locations around the Little Brown Church, including moving it westerly along the street, is that, or even perpendicular to the church behind it. But all those things would need to be worked out with the city, right? And so those permanent location decisions haven't been made.
Was there any discussion about like renovating the structure on one of those possible permanent sites, or is it only when it's completed and you move it there?
I'm not sure I understand.
Would you be allowed to use that site temporarily just to renovate the car?
No, no, they said that we couldn't use it temporarily. Even if we would agree to move it, sign a contract saying we would move it if something else needed to come in. We would be happy to be obliging, as long as we had a little notice.
Kathleen?
So it sounds like if we gave you more time to consider other sites, are there other options that you drum up? Or?
Well, no, I don't know of any other options. We've really been going around about this for quite a while now. It's really slowed us down. I don't know of any other places that are big enough and have access.
Okay.
If we were to seek a permanent location at the Little Brown Church, it is possible to renovate on site at a permanent location.
It's very difficult.
It still can be done.
But when
Scott is saying that yes, it can be completed at its permanent location. But the thing is that we haven't worked out with the city that spot.
And is there any look at going like over the hill down south down into Montero or?
Well, certainly Half Moon Bay would love the train. They would love to have the car. So would Colma, because this is the only one that's still in existence. So there's no question that if we can't handle it here in Pacifica, there are other historical societies and cities that would like it. But we haven't wanted to do that. We wanted to keep it here in Pacifica. Because this old car, 1409, this actually was up and down the coast, 1913 to 1920.
Amazing.
So I guess,
Yeah, if there are any other
But we
questions.
think that, we thought this solution at the Pereira family's place we would be very accommodating as far as trying to please the neighbors. We actually have people already that have signed up that are going to keep the site clean. We aren't going to have rubble. We're not going to have a mess. We aren't going to antagonize the neighbors. We will do anything to make the lighting not objectionable. We certainly will be happy for any kind of help to make it so that the lighting doesn't interfere with the people that live near there. And Shirley Gibbs visited, she went to all the homes and the apartments and talked to people. And by and large, everybody was very, very positive about the project. The woman in the triplex up above, she says she's going to keep an eye on it from her window, so she'll be able to see if there are any people messing around that shouldn't be. And so we really have reached out to the neighbors in a big way, and I think we would continue to try to have a good relationship with people.
Thank you very much. If there are any questions?
I just had a question for staff. Is there any capital improvement projects planned for a parking structure at that parking lot next to the Thai restaurant?
No.
Are there any plans that you know of right now to build a parking structure at that parking lot?
So, as you know, part of this specific work plan is to determine the feasibility of a parking assessment district for the Sharp Park area and to identify appropriate spots to add parking, whether or not that's surface or in a structure. But that work, is just barely in the infant stages of the planning process.
Right. So, but nothing's, we're not going to build a parking structure on that parking lot for the next 2 years.
No, not in the next 2 years.
If I could just speak frankly, I'm not sure that parking lot, from a permitting standpoint, is readily supportable. We have very limited public parking facilities in Sharp Park as it is, and the commission, I think, is aware of that when considering other recent projects in the vicinity, wanting to make sure it was known and posted that was a public parking location for overflow parking from nearby businesses. So to have this rail car take up numerous visitor-serving parking spaces, I don't know if we could have the evidence to support the findings for the coastal development permit, which would also be needed for this project. So there are a lot of unknowns about that parking lot from a permitting feasibility standpoint, let alone a city property owner willingness standpoint. And so I don't think it's the clear path forward for that site as it may seem.
No, but I drive by that parking lot a lot. It's never full, and it's full of construction equipment half the time. I mean, I think if the city were looking for a way to make it work, and there's certainly ways to make it not work. There's certainly roadblocks and you could put in front of it, but I think if you were trying to make it work, that parking lot doesn't seem to be full ever. Look, tell me if I'm wrong, maybe for FogFest, but that is the only time I've ever seen that parking lot full and couldn't accommodate this facility. And then they wouldn't have to move it far. But
Open for
Is
public.
anybody whose lights are on? You have a light on?
So have we closed public comment at this point?
Do we have public comments?
We need to reopen public.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have a card, can you bring it up here and they will, then we'll introduce you. Jim Ogades?
Jim. It's Odgers, but Jim's good enough.
Okay.
I'm a neighbor of Senor Guerrero, and I can see that parking lot all the time. And there's a lot of light that's already around the restaurants and around that area, so it's not that dark. And having some more little motion lights, I don't think is going to change anything. It's not going to impact, it's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to wake up the neighbors, because I am the neighbor. And as far as the noise level, I have asked the water department, or the scavenge department, actually, not to have those garbage trucks come at 4:15 in the morning, and they keep doing it, and they bang around and make all this racket. So noise is certainly not, I mean, I don't see anybody that's going to volunteer to go out at 7 o'clock in the morning, to your point. So I don't see that, that noise is going to be a problem. Highway 1 is a constant sound. I have to wear earplugs every night, and the noise from that is infinitesimal. I mean, these are all little, I mean, I don't see that you need to worry about a lot of the little nitpicky things here as far as putting it over. Now, moving it is a big problem, and it would be nice to have it in a permanent spot. I mean, that'd be great. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd put it in front of that, the abandoned little secondhand store between Valimar Station and the Gorilla Barbecue, so you'd have the train cars all together, and you got the little caboose, you'd have the train station, you'd have the box car, and you'd have the rail car. But that's just me, and I understand that's logistically probably not, and it wouldn't happen until it was all complete anyway, because it looks silly otherwise. But there's really, no reason to worry that I can see about putting it in the spot that you're talking about. Because as I say, Guerrero's is lit up all night, Valimar Station's lit. There's, there's some shadows over by the trees, but if motion sensors pop a light on over there, I don't, and I'll, even with earplugs, I'll hear if there's any vandals over there. So, anyway, that's all I gotta say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If there are no other comments or cards,
May I speak one more?
are you the applicant? Yeah, you can speak to rebut the,
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. May I entertain the idea, we are coming up into the rainy season right now in November, expecting storms in about 2 or 3 weeks. This would hinder our moving process. I am very appreciative of you looking into another site, either the parking site or others. What if I were to introduce giving us an extension 3 to 6 months at the existing site, looking at another area so that we are eliminating 2 moves and being more economical as far as moving the car, so that we don't have to look at this immediate process of moving it right away into a questionable area, and rather wait 3 to 6 months where it is and look at a permanent location where we can do the construction and then be closer to the permanent location ideally.
hey, thank you. I'm going to bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Just to his comment, I think, should we approve this, you don't have to move the car. You could still look at alternate spots if you can make an agreement with the city to keep, we have no jurisdiction as to how long you can stay at your current location.
It sounds like it might impact another project, though.
Yeah, but so if you get approval here, you can move it, but you can still talk to them to the extent that it's possible. We just don't know about that up here. That would be my suggestion. I'd love to talk about this more, but I think at this point, it's obvious that there's not an alternative site that can come up in the next couple weeks, and so we have to decide on this site. And we've talked a lot about all the implications for the site itself and the neighbors, but we have a time frame of a year, so.
Yeah, me personally, I really appreciate the summary of all the research that both city and the volunteers have done on different locations. I feel more comfortable that the different possible locations were thoroughly reviewed. So after that, I'm more inclined to vote yes for this project.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, I think the applicant just now made it wasn't really readily apparent from the staff report that you'd canvass the neighborhood and talk to the owner of the triplex. If there's that level of support, then, and you're kind of willing to take the risk of not, of moving it again, I think the chair raises a good point that if we approve it tonight, this doesn't stop you from going back to the city and asking again for a little bit of assistance or accommodation, if it's possible, to put that train next to where you wanted it, which I think was a good idea. And I would hope that the city would work with you a bit more on that, because this is a great project, and I hate to see you spend $4,000 to move it twice. But just things that we don't know up here. Maybe the city has good reasons for it. We just don't know, and that's why I was kind of really trying to explore that. But it sounds like Pacifica Historical Society is going to work with the neighbors and have a good lighting system, and you get the sense that's going to happen. I certainly hope so. So, after hearing kind of the rebuttal to the initial comments and hearing from the neighbor, more inclined to support it than I was at the beginning. But I encourage you I'd love to hear more about you contacting the city and seeing what they say.
Yeah, and I think you have the leverage. I mean, if you can't find a suitable site, like you said, Half Moon Bay or Colma, happy to take it. So, I mean,
Here.
talk to the city.
Just make a motion, take it to vote.
Yeah. Do you have
Or I
another
guess-
comment, Commissioner Basic?
Yeah. I'm heartened that it seems like some of the fog is breaking, and my fellow commissioners seem more likely to vote in favor of it. So rather than argue more, since I'm seeing a fog lifting and what I can only imagine really feels like an exercise in futility up to this point on the part of the Historical Society, I'm ready to make a motion, if I may.
First question, your guys' input, the time frame for weekdays, do we want to change the condition of approval to be from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or just leave it at the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.?
Yeah, I don't think we need any restrictions, but that's
Okay.
my view of it.
I mean, I didn't hear any
Had a lot of-
opposition.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw it out there.
I know in the past we've changed the conditions to be in alignment with what the applicant says they would be, which in this case is exactly what we'd be doing, but I don't know that it's necessary.
And nobody's
Okay.
asking for that in this letter.
Okay,
He's just saying,
yeah, sure.
like it.
I just wanted to, in case it was forgotten. Go ahead.
Cool. So I move that the Planning Commission find the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approve temporary use permit TUP-2-19 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Commissioner Berman?
I second the motion.
All right, please vote. All right, congratulations. You can move your car.
Read the appeal language.
What's that?
Read the appeal language.
Oh, where is the appeal language? Okay, anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. So you can do that. All right, congratulations. Next up is Commission Communications. Do we have any? No?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Big Stick.
Sure. So
Lights.
of the handful of things I did, what pertains kind of sort of to us, I attended a couple of the Ohlone celebration days. One of them was the unveiling of the mural at the community center. It's a beautiful mural. I encourage everyone to check it out. There was some thought put into it, especially the one on the southmost side. It's just a beautiful depiction of spirit, and the other mural is a beautiful depiction of history itself. And then also at the Sanchez Adobe, they've recently finished the physical construction of the building that will go on to house various museum pieces from the Adobe and also be a educational resource for the kids visiting there. So just want to follow up that I have visited these completed projects, and they're lovely and worth a visit.
All right, thank you. Staff communications?
Sure, just a few updates. I wanted to let you know that the City Council approved the first reading of the reasonable accommodation ordinance, which was before you recently. At the next City Council meeting on the 12th, kind of somewhat related to Planning Commission business, they'll be considering adoption of the triennial building code update with REACH codes included for consideration. And the latest cannabis permit on Palmetto, I'm blanking on the address right now, was appealed, and it's currently scheduled to go to City Council on the 25th of November. So at your next meeting, we'll have liaison appointment on the agenda. So 1726 Palmetto.
Great. Thank you. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? I'll make the motion. What's the second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Vote. Yay. Thank you.
Okay, it wasn't so quick, whatever.
Babysitter's gonna be.
You gotta like